Hello, my name's Elwyn Davis. I live in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and I grew up in Cameron, Missouri. And I'd like to tell you something today about one of the leading ministers in the church back in the 1950s. His name was John Blackstock. Now, my remarks about John will be from the perspective of a teenager at reunions that he directed as he was president of Far West Stake. That was a collection of congregations primarily in the northwest Missouri area, with the largest congregations being in St. Joseph, Missouri and Cameron, Missouri. It also included a little congregation in the country where the historically significant early church settlement of Far West was located. John Blackstock was a very large, seemingly gruff man. I'll speak more on his gruffness later. When he was around, you certainly knew who was in charge. When John Blackstock arrived as stake president, there were no youth camps in the stake. The only church camping experience the youth had was at reunion. So the Far West reunions were designed so that there was nearly a youth camp going on in parallel and simultaneously with the reunion for adults. Not only were there classes for youth, like at most reunions, but many mornings during the usual prayer and testimony services attended by adults, there were similar prayer and testimony services or meetings for junior high and senior high campers. Campfires back then were also attended only by youth, unlike so many reunion campfires today that are planned for all ages. It's important to realize this about Far West reunions of the 1950s because John Blackstock cared so much for the youth that he regularly met with us at youth morning prayer meetings instead of with the adults. One of the things about what John Blackstock did in leading a youth prayer meeting was almost always he would give a challenge to do something when we went home. One of his standard formulations of that challenge was for us to commit ourselves to do this one thing. He wanted us to focus our commitment. It wasn't unusual to hear him challenge us by saying, "This one thing I will do." I like that approach, and looking back, I think it shows he really understood how youth can be well-intentioned but lack focus. His phrase was short, sort of like the Nike motto, "Just do it." Maybe Nike should have paid Blackstock royalties for that. He presented a rough and gruff appearance, and I know that many youth at our reunions were somewhat afraid of him. I was pretty much in awe of him, rather than being afraid. It didn't take long until I began to see that his heart was as large, if not larger, than our reunion grounds, and the Far West reunion grounds were big. It impressed me how he remembered specific things about us, at least about me, from reunion to reunion, even though he had almost no contact with most of us during the months intervening reunions. Since I was a young person at reunion, I didn't have much or any knowledge of how it was organized. But it's my impression that he pretty much planned the entire event. Oh, he had to have delegated much of the responsibility, like he had to have someone preside over the adult prayer services when he was attending the youth ones. Now, back in those days, almost everyone lived in a tent that was rented through the stake. I recall that he seemed to be in charge of the rental of tents and cots, as well as in charge of checking them back in when reunion was over. That had to have been a huge burden on him. There's a funny story I'd like to tell you about John Blackstock that happened my senior year in high school. This kind of illustrates how his gruffness was actually more surface deep than really a part of him. My senior year, I worked for a church member named Roy Egan, who had a print shop in Cameron. I learned to do all sorts of important things, like how to handset type and how to stand for hours on end feeding a hand press. Things I've used every day, right? Well, Blackstock was scheduled to preach a week-long series of sermons in early spring in the Cameron congregation. And our print shop had the job of printing flyers advertising the series of sermons. The face of the flyer was designed to show a picture of John Blackstock. Underneath was the ID of the picture. It said, High Priest John Blackstock, President of Far West Steak. He was scheduled to come pick up the completed flyers one day. I thought it would be funny if we printed a few flyers to put on top of the stack that had a new ID that said, Big John, First Sergeant. That met with Roy's approval. We printed about 5 of those and placed them on top of the others. John Blackstock walked into the print shop with his usual take charge attitude and wanted to see the flyers. Hey, Egan, you got the flyers ready? He said. I handed him the stack. He took one look at it and roared, Egan, whose idea was this, yours or that Davis kid? I had to confess it was my idea. When he saw that there were only a few like that, he took it as the joke it was, and he thought it was funny. When I checked into Reunion that summer to get a tent, he grabbed my hand in his usual huge handshake and said, Davis, I'm going to have to keep my eye on you this week. We got along quite well that week. Such are some of the things I remember about a giant of a man and a giant of a minister for the Lord, John Blackstock.